The corridor outside the triage ward still smelled faintly of burned insulation and antiseptic, an unpleasant combination that suggested the station's environmental systems were tired of pretending everything was under control. Julian walked anyway. He had been doing that a lot since the skirmish, walking when he should have been horizontal, breathing when he should have been memorialized. His uniform was stiff with dried sealant and something darker beneath it, and the ache in his side pulsed with a patient, almost polite rhythm, as if waiting its turn to be taken seriously. Inside the ward, lights hummed with the steady indifference of machines designed to outlast everyone in the room. Kireth looked up from a med table that had not yet forgiven its last occupant. Her long ears angled slightly forward, a reflexive gesture Julian would later learn meant focus, not curiosity. At the moment, it just made her look like someone who did not appreciate surprises. She took in his posture, the way he favored one side, the subtle lag in his left hand, and sighed in a tone that suggested paperwork was about to become aggressive. "You're late," she said, already reaching for a scanner. Julian smiled because smiling had become his default response to bad news. "I like to build suspense." She swept the scanner across his torso. The display flickered, recalibrated, then flickered again, as if embarrassed. Kireth frowned, adjusted the frequency, and scanned once more. Her ears twitched. Julian noticed and decided not to comment on it, mostly because the pain had just spiked hard enough to make his thoughts briefly alphabetical. "You were hit 8 hours ago," she said, reading the combat log that had finally caught up with him. "Why are you walking?" "Morale exercise," Julian said. "Command says it's important." Kireth made a sound that was not a laugh, but had once known a laugh socially. She cut away the damaged fabric with precise movements, exposing a wound that should have been catastrophic. The edges were wrong. Too clean. Too quiet. The scanner chimed again, this time with the unmistakable signature of a Vrythian nerve disruptor. Her hand stopped. Julian waited. He had learned that waiting was often the safest option. "That's the part where you tell me it looks worse than it feels, right?" "No," Kireth said. "This is the part where I tell you no one survives even an hour with this wound." He considered that. "I've always been bad with schedules." She turned the scanner toward him so he could see the readings, perhaps to confirm she was not joking. Neural pathways on the display looked like a city map drawn by someone who had changed their mind halfway through. Lines curved where they should have ended. Junctions glowed where there should have been silence. Kireth stared as if the image might apologize if she gave it time. "You should be dead," she said, not unkindly. Julian nodded. "I've been getting that a lot today." She resumed working, slower now, as if approaching an animal that might suddenly decide it was a weapon. As she cleaned the wound, Julian felt a strange doubling of sensation, like his nerves were briefly discussing the experience among themselves before reporting back. It was unsettling, but also oddly efficient. "You are functioning," Kireth said. "Motor control is intact. Cognitive response is more than intact." "Is that bad?" "It is not standard," he chuckled despite himself. "Standard's overrated." She ran another scan, then another, each one deepening the crease between her eyes. The data refused to behave. The damage from the disruptor was real, unmistakable, and yet his nervous system had rerouted around it, building new pathways as if improvisation were a built-in feature. Kireth felt a familiar unease settle in her chest, the kind that came when medicine crossed into something else. Julian shifted on the table. "So, am I getting a sticker or a lecture?" "Neither," she said. "You are getting bandaged." She wrapped the wound with practiced efficiency, though her mind raced ahead of her hands. As she worked, she noticed his reflexes responding before she touched him, muscles anticipating pressure that had not yet occurred. He noticed her noticing. "Sorry, that's been happening." "What has?" "The knowing before the thing." Her ears flattened slightly. "That is not a symptom." "Great," Julian said. "I was hoping to be special." When she finished, she stepped back and regarded him, a nurse and a miracle standing in the hum of a station that did not care for either. Somewhere beyond the bulkheads, reports were being filed, queries sent, curiosity sharpening into interest. Kireth knew how that ended. For now, she met his eyes and kept her voice light. "You will stay here," she said. For observation. He grinned. You say that like I have better plans. As the ward lights dimmed to night cycle, Kireth logged the treatment with deliberate vagueness. Julian lay back, feeling the strange quiet coordination of his own body, and wondered how long it would take before someone else noticed he was still alive. Julian woke before the lights shifted, which would have been unremarkable if he hadn't woken knowing they were about to. The ward was quiet in the way places became quiet when they assumed you were unconscious and therefore irrelevant. He lay still, counting breaths, and watched the faint glow along the ceiling panels intensify by degrees that felt pre-announced, like a story he'd already skimmed. When the lights reached full, he exhaled and decided not to think too hard about it. Kireth arrived with a cart that hummed a fraction of a second after she touched it, as if it were trying to keep up with her intentions. Her long ears angled forward again, the same focused posture from before, and Julian wondered if they ever got tired of telegraphing her mood. He smiled at her. She did not smile back, but there was less severity in her eyes than there had been 8 hours ago, which he took as progress. You slept, she said. I practiced, Julian replied. I'm still new at it. She checked the monitors, eyes flicking faster than the scrolling data. You woke early. I had a meeting with the ceiling. Her ear twitched. He was learning to recognize that one. Mild irritation, possibly aimed at the universe. She adjusted a sensor on his wrist, and he felt a faint warmth bloom, then fade, like a memory of heat rather than the thing itself. I am going to ask you questions, she said. You will answer honestly. Dangerous way to start a conversation, Julian said. But okay. When I touch you, she said, positioning her hand a few centimeters above his forearm, tell me when you feel it. He opened his mouth, then paused. Now. Her hand had not yet descended. She froze, eyes snapping to his face, then to the space between her fingers and his skin. She moved closer, slower. When she made contact, the sensation arrived exactly when it was supposed to, overlapping the earlier one like a delayed echo. That doesn't usually happen in that order, he said helpfully. No, she said, voice flat. It does not. She ran a series of reflex tests that made no sense to him, but apparently made even less sense to the equipment. His responses were immediate, sometimes anticipatory, sometimes layered, as if his body were answering multiple versions of the same question. When she tested visual tracking, his eyes followed the light before it moved. When she tested auditory response, he flinched at a sound that had not yet been emitted, then looked apologetic when it arrived on schedule. I swear I'm not trying to be difficult, he said. It's just loud. What is loud? Everything, Julian said, and also the gaps between things. She stopped again, leaning back slightly, studying him as if he were a diagram that had begun to argue back. Her ears shifted, angling outward now, a posture that suggested contemplation. She keyed the scanner for a deeper neural read, bypassing safety prompts with the casual authority of someone who had long ago memorized which rules bent and which snapped. The image bloomed above the console, a living map in motion. Kireth felt her breath catch despite years of training that insisted she not do that. The damage was still there, a dark interruption where the disruptor had torn through established pathways. But around it, through it, new structures were forming, luminous and active, knitting themselves with an urgency she had only seen in early developmental models. You are not healing, she said quietly. You are rerouting. Julian squinted at the display. Is that better or worse? It is different. Ah, he said. My favorite category. She magnified a section, watching as a signal detoured around the damage, split, recombined, then strengthened, as if practice were happening in real time. The system was not repairing a road. It was inventing shortcuts. This is not stress response, she said. This is not compensation. Your nervous system is creating new pathways as it encounters failure. Julian lay back, staring at the ceiling again. So when people say humans are adaptable, they didn't mean this. They did not know this, she said. He laughed softly, then winced. I knew joining medical would be bad for my health. She gave him a look that suggested humor was acceptable in limited doses, then continued. Have you experienced anything else? Hallucinations, temporal dislocation. I once thought I saw my commanding officer apologize, Julian said. but that might have been the blood loss. Her mouth twitched despite herself. Focus, he sighed. Okay, sometimes I know things a moment early. Sometimes I feel like my hands are already where they're going to be. And sometimes, he hesitated, I get this sense that something is about to go wrong, like the universe clearing its throat. She nodded slowly, cataloging each admission. And you did not report this. I figured if I told anyone I'd get grounded, he said, or dissected, or both. Her ears flattened, just briefly. He noticed. Too dark. Accurate, she said. She straightened, the decision forming even as she watched the data shift again. You will remain here. I will continue testing. Because you're curious, he said. Because you are alive, she replied. And that is now interesting. He grinned. I've always wanted to be interesting. I was aiming for charming, but we take what we can get. As she logged the results, choosing her words with care, Kireth felt the weight of attention approaching, the way gravity announced itself before the fall. For now the ward held, the machines hummed, and Julian lay there very much alive, listening to the future arriving just a little too early. Kireth did not sleep. She told herself she was resting, eyes closed in the narrow alcove beside the ward, but her mind kept rearranging the same impossible images into new orders, hoping one of them would suddenly become reasonable. The station's night cycle dimmed the lights and softened the hum of machinery, yet the neural map from the scanner remained sharp behind her eyes, glowing and insistent. Julian, on the other hand, slept like someone who had decided the universe could manage itself for a few hours. He snored lightly, an entirely human sound that felt almost defiant under the circumstances. Every so often his fingers twitched, not randomly, but with purpose, as if practicing movements for a future he hadn't reached yet. Kireth rose and returned to the console. She pulled archived medical data from Vrythian encounters, grim reading even by battlefield standards. The nerve disruptor was elegant in its cruelty, a weapon designed to make the body betray itself. Neural cascades, system-wide failure, death arriving politely but firmly within an hour. There were no exceptions. She checked again, and again. The records remained stubbornly consistent. She glanced at Julian, alive 8 hours past impossible, and felt a flicker of something dangerously close to awe. The scanner chimed softly as she initiated another deep read, this one passive, observational. The display blossomed, and there it was again. Movement where there should have been none. His nervous system did not merely respond, it anticipated. Signals branched preemptively, like thoughts preparing counter-arguments before being challenged. Julian stirred. You know, he said without opening his eyes, most people knock before staring at someone's insides. Kireth jumped despite herself, then recovered with professional dignity. You were asleep. I was, he agreed. I stopped being. She studied him. Did you feel the scan begin? He frowned, considering. I felt a question, then the answer. That is not how scans work. Then they're doing it wrong, Julian said, opening his eyes. He looked more alert than someone with his injury had any right to be. Did I pass? You are failing remarkably well, she said. He smiled. Story of my career. She pulled a chair closer, sitting opposite him. The informal posture surprised them both. I need you to understand something, she said. What is happening to you is not recorded. Not in human medicine, not in ours. Julian absorbed that, gaze drifting to the ceiling. So I'm not just late to dying. No. Good, he said. That was starting to feel rude. Despite herself, she huffed a quiet laugh. Then her expression sobered. Your nervous system is adapting under catastrophic stress. It is not repairing damage. It is reorganizing itself in response to it. This should not be possible in an adult organism. But it is, Julian said, which either means I'm special or your textbooks are. Both may be true, she admitted. She brought up a magnified view of his neural activity, pointing out the newly formed pathways. These are not random. They are efficient, optimized. Julian squinted. They look like they're in a hurry. They are, Kireth said, as if time matters more to them than it should. He was quiet for a moment. I've been feeling that, Like things are slightly ahead of themselves. Like I'm watching reality buffer. Her ears angled forward. Explain. Sometimes, he said slowly, choosing words like tools that might break. I know what someone is about to say, not exactly, just the shape of it, and sometimes my body moves before I decide to. It's not me, exactly, but it's still mine. Kireth listened, heart beating faster despite herself. This was not pathology. This was emergence. There is another concern, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I was worried there wouldn't be. She tapped the console, bringing up a communications log. Medical anomalies of this scale attract attention. Military research divisions monitor for deviations. Julian groaned. I knew it. I survived one impossible thing, and suddenly I'm a recruitment poster. They would not recruit you, Kireth said. They would study you. Same energy, he replied. Less snacks. She almost smiled. Almost. Your condition represents a potential shift in understanding adaptive biology. That makes you valuable. And dangerous, Julian said quietly. Yes, she agreed. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing beyond the uniform and the long ears and the calm competence. So what happens now? She hesitated, honesty pressed against protocol. Officially, I am required to report everything I have observed. And unofficially. And unofficially, she said, lowering her voice though no one else was near, I am not convinced that would end well for you. Julian nodded, unsurprised. I had a feeling you'd say that. You anticipated it, she said. He grinned faintly. I'm trying not to make a habit of that. Silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Outside the ward, the station continued its routines, blissfully unaware that something quietly unprecedented was lying in a medical bed, cracking jokes and rewriting biology. Kireth straightened. For now we observe. We document carefully. And quietly, Julian added. And quietly, she agreed. He stretched, testing his limbs. Everything responded smoothly, almost eagerly. You know, he said, if this turns out to be the next step in human evolution, I'd like to apologize in advance. For what? For the paperwork, Julian said. The first inquiry arrived disguised as courtesy. Kireth recognized the tone immediately, the careful neutrality that pretended to be concern while sharpening its knives. A message blinked onto her console requesting confirmation of a statistical irregularity flagged by automated battlefield analytics. No names, no accusations, just a polite question about a patient whose recovery curve had refused to behave. She closed the message without answering. Julian watched her do it from the bed, hands folded behind his head, like a man waiting for a lecture he intended to derail. That looked important. It was curious, Kireth said. Curiosity is rarely innocent. He nodded. Back home we say, curiosity killed the cat. Her ears angled slightly. What happened to the cat? Very thorough autopsy, Julian said. Lots of funding. She gave him a look that suggested he was closer to the truth than she liked. Over the next few hours, the station seemed to lean in. Diagnostic pings multiplied. Routine system checks requested access they did not need. Someone, somewhere, had noticed the absence of a death report where one should have been filed neatly and forgotten. Kireth continued her examinations with the same meticulous calm, though her movements had acquired a sharp economy, like someone packing quickly while pretending they weren't. Julian, for his part, felt the attention before it arrived. A tightening in his chest preceded every incoming transmission, a subtle pressure that resolved only after the alert sounded. He mentioned it casually while she adjusted a monitor. Do you always get that look right before something annoying happens? He asked. What look? The one where your ears do that thing, he said, gesturing vaguely near his own head. Like they're bracing. She paused, then deliberately continued her work. They do not brace. They absolutely brace, she sighed. What did you feel? Like the room was about to be interrupted, Julian said, which I know sounds rude. It sounds accurate, she replied. She initiated another scan, this one masked beneath a routine metabolic check. The results scrolled faster than before, his neural activity forming patterns that were beginning to look less improvised and more intentional. Feedback loops reinforced themselves. Predictive pathways stabilized. His nervous system was no longer reacting to damage. It was preparing for it. "You are becoming more efficient," she said. "Story of my life," Julian said. "I thrive under unreasonable expectations." Kireth almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she brought up a projection of the station's medical oversight structure, isolating the nodes most likely to escalate the inquiry. "If this progresses," she said, "there will be a formal request. And then, she said carefully, "you will be transferred." Julian considered that. "To somewhere with worse coffee." "To somewhere with fewer choices," she corrected. He grew quiet, the humor retreating just enough to show what it had been guarding. "I don't want to be taken apart," he said. "I've grown attached to the arrangement." "I know," she said, and surprised herself with how quickly the words came. The second inquiry arrived less politely. A representative from military medical intelligence requested a consult, citing precedent and security. Kireth delayed it by invoking quarantine protocols that had not technically been updated but still carried weight. She sent partial data, carefully bland, stripped of anything that might suggest miracle or threat. Julian felt the shift immediately, a subtle acceleration in his thoughts, as if the world had increased its pace and expected him to keep up. "Someone's getting closer," he said. "Yes," Kireth replied. "They are." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing with an ease that still unsettled her. "So what's the plan?" She hesitated, the weight of it settling fully now. "There are options." "Options is good, Julian said. "I like options. Some are better than others." "Say the bad ones first," he said. "That way the good ones feel heroic." She met his eyes. "The worst option is compliance. You become a subject. Your autonomy becomes negotiable. And the second worst—" "We lie," she said. Julian blinked. That escalated quickly. "We omit," she corrected. "We delay. We document privately." He grinned, relief flickering through the tension. "I always wanted to be part of a conspiracy. Do we get code names?" "No." "Disappointing." She leaned closer, voice low. "If we do this, it must be precise. Your condition cannot appear stable. It must look inconclusive." "I can do inconclusive," Julian said. "I've been practicing my whole life." Despite herself, she laughed quietly, the sound brief but real. Then she straightened, professionalism snapping back into place. "You will remain here. We continue observation. We stay ahead of their questions. And if they get too close—" She did not answer immediately. Outside the ward, boots passed, the cadence of authority pretending not to listen. Julian felt it before he heard it, a prickle along his spine that said attention was sharpening into intent. Kireth finally spoke. "Then we move." Julian nodded, trusting her without fully understanding why. "You know," he said, attempting levity, "most nurses just tell you to rest and hydrate." "I am not most nurses," she said. "No," he agreed. "You're the one who decided I was worth lying for." Her ears angled forward, just slightly. "Do not make me regret that." He smiled, soft and earnest. "I'll try to stay alive." "That seems like a good start." As another request pinged unanswered on her console, Kireth began drafting 2 sets of notes, one for the official record and one for the truth. Somewhere in the layers between them, a human who should have died was quietly becoming something new, and she was no longer willing to let the future claim him without a fight. They established a routine the way people always did when the universe became unreliable. Quietly, carefully, and with a shared agreement not to say out loud how fragile it all was. Kireth scheduled Julian's examinations during system lulls, tucked between legitimate emergencies and routine maintenance windows when oversight was distracted by numbers behaving badly elsewhere. Julian, for his part, learned when to look tired, when to move a little slower than his body wanted, and when to wince convincingly enough to reassure anyone watching that he was still, at heart, breakable. It was harder than it sounded. His body had developed opinions. The first time he tried to fake sluggish reflexes, his hand twitched out of sequence, catching a dropped instrument before it hit the floor. He stared at it, then at Kireth. "I can drop it again," he offered, more convincingly. She closed her eyes for a brief, controlled moment. "Please do not." They moved their private work to a secondary diagnostic bay, officially designated for obsolete equipment and unofficially used by staff who valued privacy. The scanners there were older, less precise, easier to blame when results came back inconclusive. Kireth supplemented them with portable sensors of her own design, devices that logged locally, disconnected from the station's main systems. Julian joked that it felt like being treated by a medic who had learned engineering out of spite. "I did not learn it out of spite," she said, adjusting a sensor at the base of his skull. "Out of professional curiosity," he guessed. "Out of survival," she corrected. The data they gathered was alarming in its subtlety. Julian's neural adaptations were no longer reactive. They were anticipatory in a way that suggested pattern recognition across time, not just stimulus. When exposed to simulated stressors, his nervous system reconfigured itself before failure could propagate. When deprived of input, it filled the gaps, predicting the missing signals with unnerving accuracy. "You are modeling outcomes," Kireth said, watching the readout scroll. "Your body is rehearsing futures." Julian lay still, staring at the ceiling. "I'd prefer the ones where I'm on a beach. There are no beaches in your neural activity." "That explains a lot." Between tests, they talked, sometimes about the science, sometimes about nothing at all. Humor became a pressure valve, letting off just enough steam to keep fear from becoming dominant. Julian teased Kireth about her precise note-taking, the way her annotations were perfectly aligned even when written in haste. She countered by pointing out that humans use jokes the way other species use defensive spines. "It is inefficient," she told him. "It's charming," he replied. "Big difference." The inquiries did not stop. They evolved. Requests became invitations. Invitations became reminders of authority. Kireth declined them all with escalating politeness, citing unstable data, ongoing assessments, unresolved variables. Each response bought time, but time itself was becoming a resource Julian felt slipping through his fingers in strange ways. He began to sense when someone was about to enter the bay, the pressure of attention preceding footsteps by a heartbeat or two. "I think I can tell when people are looking for me," he said one evening, voice low. "That is not possible," Kireth said automatically, then stopped herself. "Explain." "It's like static," Julian said. "Not sound. More like intent, like being thought about loudly." Her ears angled outward, troubled. "That suggests external awareness." "Which is bad," he said cheerfully. "But on the upside, I'm rarely surprised." She watched him closely. The changes were accelerating, not in bursts, but in steady increments, as if his biology had accepted adaptation as its new baseline. This was no longer recovery. This was transformation. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Is it about whether I'm still human?" Julian asked. She hesitated. "No." "Good," he said. "I wasn't ready for that one." "If this continues," she said, "you may develop capabilities that cannot be hidden indefinitely." He considered that. "Then we better understand them first." That was the moment the unspoken agreement between them solidified into something deliberate. Kireth rerouted her research priorities, focusing not on documenting outcomes, but on mapping limits. What triggered adaptation? What slowed it? What frightened it? Julian participated willingly, joking through discomfort, trusting her in a way that both humbled and alarmed her. During one test, a sudden power fluctuation rippled through the bay. Julian stiffened, breath catching, eyes unfocused for a fraction of a second. "Julian," Kireth said sharply. "I'm fine," he said, though his heart was racing. "Just saw that twice." "What did you see?" "The power spike," he said, "and then the way it didn't matter." She pulled up the logs. His nervous system had compensated for the electromagnetic interference before it fully manifested, insulating itself against disruption, a countermeasure to the weapon that should have killed him. "They will want this," she said softly. "I know," Julian replied, "which is why I'm glad you're terrible at following orders." Her ears flattened. "Careful. I mean that as a compliment." They shared a quiet moment, the kind that only existed when danger paused to breathe. Then the station's internal alert chimed. A priority channel request, encrypted, routed directly to medical command. Julian felt it before the sound finished forming. "They're done being patient." Kireth straightened, fingers flying over the console. "We anticipated this." "Did we?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Yes." She transmitted a carefully constructed packet of data, dense enough to discourage immediate analysis, ambiguous enough to invite delay. As it sent, Julian felt the pressure ease slightly, like a held breath released. "You know," he said, attempting levity, "for someone who nearly died, my schedule's gotten very full." "You are inconveniently alive," Kireth said. "It attracts attention." "I'll try to be less interesting," he promised. She almost smiled again. Outside the bay, interest continued to gather, slow and inevitable. Inside, a nurse with long ears and a patient who refused to die worked side by side, documenting a future that neither of them was ready to surrender to anyone else. The station stopped pretending first. Security protocols tightened by increments small enough to look routine, but precise enough to be intentional. Corridors rerouted foot traffic away from medical. Access logs developed a sudden interest in who went where and for how long. Julian felt it like a change in pressure, the same way he sensed a storm before the first drop fell. "They're circling," he said one morning, before any alert sounded. Kireth did not ask how he knew. She had learned which questions wasted time. "Then we adjust." Adjusting meant movement, not fleeing, yet, but never being exactly where expectation placed them. Tests shifted locations. Logs were fragmented. Data packets were delayed, rerouted, sometimes intentionally corrupted, just enough to force re-verification. Kireth worked with a calm that bordered on surgical, and Julian followed her lead, discovering that his nervous system had begun doing something similar on its own. He could feel systems before they failed. Power fluctuations registered as a faint itch behind his eyes. Security sweeps announced themselves as a tightening in his chest, a whisper of intent brushing against his awareness. "It's like the station is thinking loudly," he said as they relocated to another unused bay. "That is not comforting," Kireth replied. "I didn't say it was," Julian said, "but it's helpful." She ran a new series of scans, this time monitoring how his body responded to simulated surveillance signals. The results were immediate. His neural activity reorganized, dampening certain sensory inputs while amplifying others. The adaptations were no longer subtle. "You are filtering reality," she said. Julian frowned. "I don't remember signing up for that feature." "You did not," she said. "Your biology did." He lay back, arms folded. "Is this the part where you tell me I'm no longer normal?" She met his gaze. "Normal is a statistical concept. You have exceeded it." "That's one way to put it," he said. "Another is walking violation of expectations." Her ears angled forward. "You use humor when you are afraid." "I also use it when I'm bored," Julian said. "But yes, mostly afraid." The first corporate signal arrived masked as a research grant inquiry, routed through civilian channels with impressive paperwork and unsettling efficiency. Kireth recognized the signature immediately. Corporate interests did not chase anomalies unless they smelled profit. "They want to patent you," she said flatly. Julian blinked. "Do I at least get royalties?" "No." "Then I'm less flattered." His adaptation spiked that evening. Without warning, he reacted to a security sweep before it reached their level, pulling Kireth back just as a scanner passed the doorway. He did it without thinking, muscles responding to information he had not consciously received. She stared at him afterward. "You moved before the threat existed." "I moved before it mattered," Julian corrected. He looked down at his hands, flexing them. "That's new." Her readings confirmed it. His nervous system was no longer predicting outcomes seconds ahead. It was modeling branches of possibility, weighting them, selecting the safest path, not consciously, automatically. "This cannot continue unchecked," she said. Julian smiled faintly. "You say that like it ever checked with us first." They argued then, quietly but intensely, about limits, about consent, about whether slowing his adaptations was even possible. Kireth feared what would happen if his biology outpaced his sense of self. Julian feared becoming something so useful that choice stopped being relevant. In the middle of it, an alert chimed. Priority override, medical command. Julian felt it before the sound finished forming. "That's not military," he said. "That's consolidated." Caress swore under her breath, a sharp sound in her own language. Joint Task Force. Of course it is, Julian said. Nothing says teamwork like deciding what to do with someone else's body. The message was brief. A formal transfer order, couched in language about collaboration and advancement. Arrival window estimated at 6 hours. Silence stretched between them. Well, Julian said eventually, on the bright side, they're very efficient. Kireth turned away, fingers moving fast, pulling up contingency plans she had hoped never to use. We cannot outrun this, she said. Not physically. Julian watched her, feeling the future press closer, multiple paths overlapping like reflections. Some ended badly, some ended worse. One, thin but persistent, felt possible. What if we don't run, he said. She paused. Explain. What if, Julian said slowly, we change the variables? He closed his eyes, focusing inward the way he had learned to do. The station's systems unfolded in his awareness. Not schematics, not data, but patterns of intention and response. He reached gently, experimentally. His nervous system adapted again, synchronizing with the electromagnetic rhythms around him. Lights flickered. Kireth's console stuttered, then stabilized. Julian, I'm not breaking anything, he said quickly. I'm negotiating. You cannot negotiate with infrastructure. Watch me, he murmured. The station's sensors blurred, their certainty dissolving into probabilistic haze. To outside observers, medical readings flattened, anomalies smoothing into noise. Julian's biology learned to hide itself, cloaking its own signals the way prey learned to disappear. Kireth stared at the data, disbelief warring with relief. You are masking yourself. Adaptive biology, Julian said weakly. Turns out it adapts to attention too. He slumped slightly, exhausted. She steadied him, hands firm on his shoulders. This is dangerous, she said. So is everything lately, he replied, but it buys us time. The incoming transfer pinged again, its confidence unshaken. Kireth sent a response. Technical delays, unstable readings, interference from station systems. Just enough truth to sell the lie. Julian opened his eyes, managing a crooked smile. So, still inconveniently alive. Yes, Kireth said, gripping his arm, and increasingly difficult to find. Outside, powerful interests converge, certain of what they would claim. Inside, a human who refused to break and a nurse who refused to surrender him stood in the narrowing space between future and choice, buying time one impossible adaptation at a time. The transfer never arrived. At first, that was the most unsettling part. Deadlines slipped, arrival windows recalculated themselves into polite uncertainty, and the Joint Task Force's messages grew strangely vague, as if confidence had misplaced its notes. Kireth watched the channels with a stillness that suggested patience, though her long ears betrayed her by angling toward every flicker of incoming data. Julian felt the absence like a held breath, finally deciding not to exhale. They've lost the thread, he said, eyes unfocused as if listening to something beyond the room. Or they think they have. That is rarely comforting, Kireth replied. He smiled. It's comforting adjacent. They had moved again, this time not to hide but to settle. A small medical annex near the station's outer ring, officially mothballed, unofficially quiet. The systems there were old enough to be stubborn, resistant to the kind of remote manipulation that modern oversight preferred. Julian liked it because the walls felt less curious. Kireth liked it because nothing tried to be clever. She ran one last full scan, unmasked, unfiltered. The image that rose from the console no longer startled her. Julian's nervous system had stabilized into something coherent, elegant in its own strange way. The new pathways had stopped proliferating wildly, reinforcing instead, integrating rather than improvising. You are no longer changing rapidly, she said. Julian stretched, testing himself. Everything responded smoothly, with a calm that had been absent since the skirmish. So I'm done evolving. For now, she said. Your system has reached equilibrium. He nodded, then hesitated. Do I still do the thing? She watched as he focused, then relaxed. The room remained quiet. No flickers, no anticipatory shivers. You retain enhanced processing, she said, but it no longer overrides you. Good, he said. I was worried I'd start finishing other people's sentences forever. She closed the scan, documenting the results with care. This time there were no parallel files, no lies layered beneath truth. She transmitted a final report, thorough, precise, and entirely uninteresting. It described an anomalous survival followed by stabilization. No replicable mechanisms identified. No immediate applications. It was ignored. Corporate channels moved on, redirected by shinier prospects. Military intelligence archived the case under unresolved anomalies, a category so crowded it had become invisible. Whatever Julian had become, it refused to be packaged neatly, and that, it seemed, made it unprofitable. Kireth exhaled for the first time in days. They have decided you are inconvenient, Julian grinned. I always knew my greatest skill was being difficult to monetize. They sat together in the quiet afterward, the station's slow rotation humming beneath them. Julian considered the past days, the pain, the fear, the strange clarity that had come with knowing too much too early. He felt different now, not just physically, but in the way he occupied the world. Less reactive, more deliberate. I don't feel broken anymore, he said. You were never broken, Kireth replied. You were injured. Still, he said, I used to think surviving was the hard part. And now it feels like choosing what to do next, Julian said, which is somehow worse. Her ears angled forward. What will you choose? He thought about returning to combat medicine, about patching people up in places where the universe seemed determined to undo them. He thought about what he could sense now, not futures, not predictions, but patterns, vulnerabilities, moments where intervention mattered most. I think, he said slowly, I want to help without being owned by it. Kireth considered him, then nodded. That is a reasonable goal. He smiled at her. You could come with me. She raised an eyebrow. That is not how nurses are usually recruited. I'm branching out, he said. Besides, you're very good at ethical violations when they're for the right reason. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile. I would prefer to call it informed discretion. They finalized arrangements quietly. Julian was discharged officially, his file closed with bureaucratic finality. Kireth requested a transfer to a civilian medical liaison role, citing exhaustion and the need for broader perspective. No one argued. The system rarely noticed when people slipped sideways instead of forward. As Julian prepared to leave the station, he paused at the threshold, taking in the space where he should have died. He felt no premonition now, no echo of impending moments. Just himself, solid and present. You know, he said, if anyone asks, I'm going to tell them I survived because I was too stubborn to listen to my own biology. That is not inaccurate, Kireth said. He extended a hand. She took it, her grip steady. Thank you, he said, for not turning me into a case study. She inclined her head. Thank you for reminding me why I became a nurse. They stepped into the corridor together, leaving behind the quiet miracle of an impossible survival. Somewhere, research agendas shifted and weapons were redesigned, unaware of the thing they had failed to claim. Somewhere else, a human learned to live with what he had become. Not a weapon, not a warning, but proof that adaptation did not have to cost autonomy. Julian glanced at Kireth as they walked. So, he said, what do we do first? She considered. We start small. He nodded, smiling. Good. I've had enough of impossible for a while. And for once, the future agreed to wait its turn.